In response, this is the Instant Speed Podcast. I'm Flake, and we've got a special guest today to discuss a little bit about what's going on in the ProQuest, what decks you should play, success with those decks, and the meta in general. And I'm joined by the UK Nationals champion, Matthew Foulkes. Matthew, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hello, Flake. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. And I just want to let you know that as a guest here on the show, we've had plenty of guests on the show, but you actually hit that magic number of guests, so you win a special prize. I have it right here.
Wait, really? Yeah. What do I get?
It's a Matthew Foulkes commemorative tunic indicator.
Good.
I figured that you might like this.
Okay. All right. Brilliant. Perfect. Okay. There you go. Wow, that's quite a welcome. Thanks, Flake.
All right, you and I, we like to poke fun at each other and such, fine. But ultimately, the success that you've had in Flesh and Blood has transcended from the UK Nationals, where you went undefeated and all the way up to where we are now, which is ProQuest season. And I figured it'd be a great conversation to have with you because not only being the UK Nats champion, you've also top-8'd one ProQuest, but won another, and I'm sure that there are more on the docket for you, just collecting these PTIs and just continuing your success there. So just talk to us a little bit from. We'll start a little bit beyond this and go sort of work our way up to where we are now. From UK Nats to ProQuest, how have you seen the meta evolve to where it was then and where it is now? Because it seems like it is still a Runeblade / Guardian meta, but that has kind of shifted. It looks like almost a lateral move versus an actual progression.
The thing I always say about, specifically the Runeblades and the Guardians part is true as well, but a lot of heroes don't actually have any text on them. I think, when you look at how their abilities actually translate to advantage and damage in the game, but all of the Runeblades generate value just by existing. So Viserai, every time you play a card, you gain a damage. Briar generates blocking value and go-agains, and Chain just has infinite go-again, basically. Whereas when you look, so they will, by nature, generate value. And so their cards have to be severely undercosted for them not to overperform. And so when they keep releasing more and more good cards, their heroes are so much stronger, and their equipment sets as well. It's not necessarily a virtue of the cards in their deck, but by the heroes and their equipment that really set the tone of what makes, especially by class. Runeblade and Guardian both have such solid sets of armor as well that those classes will continue to perform, I imagine, for seasons to come, unless we see massive shakeups.
Well, that's a whole other issue I find, is the fact that it's without a standard rotation or anything down the line in terms of cards just sort of trickling out of the meta, new cards will come in and just improve upon these classes. It's not like other classes got worse because nothing rotated out. It's just the fact that some of these other classes just got leaps and bounds better, despite the fact that Chain and Runeblade lost some pieces. The others just took their mantle. It seems like from Chain to Briar now to Viserai, Runeblade has always had cards to rely on, and it's just how you piece them together. The framework is there, so you'll always be able to just scatter paint on the canvas and it'll look pretty within that framework.
I will say I'm glad that when I first read Briar, I remember back right before Tales, because I like to do a bit of speculative buying. I consider myself a bit of a financier. I never sell the cards; they just sit on my desk. I have from UK Nationals, I bought around 80 Cokes of Commotion, and I still have around 70 Cokes of Commotion still on my desk. But I just like to buy them just because it makes me feel kind of smart. And the moment I read Briar, I bought around 20 Gorganian tomes. They were only sat around £8, I guess around $10, $11, and now they're sat around $30. I think around that now. And I certainly don't regret making those purchases, in terms of price. I regret because I'll never sell them because I'm useless when it comes to selling cards. But yeah, like you said, the Runeblade certainly, as a class, does something that's so consistently powerful and can hit much higher peaks than other classes, and that kind of gives it, But I don't think that it's necessarily broken. Right now, I think where we are in the meta is there's actually a few good choices to play.
And we could talk about that because where we are at from UK Nats to where we are now now at in the ProQuest season, there's been a lot of metas in terms of this game are always going to be pockets of whatever tournament occurs, and then the data comes in, so you can kind of evaluate in that case. And there are outliers, there are anomalies in terms of an Azalea making a top 8. Like, is she good now? No, she's not good. Someone was just playing her properly within and maybe found the right pairings, etc. Maybe it was a weak field. We don't know. Ultimately, we know that Azalea is not necessarily going to be tier 1. However, we do know what those tier 1 decks are. So I want to ask you at your ProQuest what you played and a little bit of the reasoning in terms of why you made that choice and what led up to the practice and the anticipation for your particular tournaments.
Sure. So in the lead up to this ProQuest season, I've been practicing a lot. Just been trying to get in like 10 games every day and playing just a massive variety of basically anything. Like, I wanted to have a broad experience because I didn't have that going in. When I won UK Nationals, I was very inexperienced still. I'd only played Chain, and then I picked up Briar not long after the bannings, and then played almost exclusively that in the lead up. So I didn't really have a broad understanding of the game. I joked that I'd never blocked with a card in my life. And that wasn't somewhere where I wanted to be, especially with a set coming out that like would impact basically every class in the game. I wanted to have that broad experience, because it still helps as well to have played both sides of a matchup. So even if I did end up playing Runeblades all season, at least I would understand more, And so I've played a ton. And after the bans, I first jumped onto Prism a bit before the Australian and New Zealand Nationals weekend because, what Prism in the previous format was sort of positioned to do well into the Guardians, to do well into the slower decks, and then Briar came along and just ruined that for everyone. Just, I'm sure as everyone was like, well, what happened to Prism? And then suddenly at New Zealand Nationals, Briar hadn't even gone away yet, but everyone in New Zealand had found ways to beat Briar, or a lot of people had, and we saw the Prisms rise up and completely take over that tournament in New Zealand.
Right.
And so I was trying to get the reps in with that deck just to try and understand, how do we play? And then suddenly Everfest comes and they just print 15 new cards which go straight into the deck, and I was like, oh my god. You can just put 2 auras into play every single turn, and eventually you have 6 auras in play, and your opponent loses the game. That's where I started with Everfest. That was the first thing I built.
You settled on Prism, and was it more from a perspective of just, in a vacuum, this is a very strong deck, or was it more of a countering choice? You evaluate what the meta's landscape is going to look like, and you felt that this was the best positioned to counter what everyone else may have already settled on as their deck of choice.
Well, if you sort of view Tier 1 as sort of a triangle, right now I think it's fair to say that the Tier 1 is Prism, Viserai, and Starvo. Bravo, Star of the Show. I think those 3 sort of sit atop the format as the best decks. And in that, it does sort of function like a triangle, in that Starvo is strong, not smashing, not insanely good, but is strong into the Viserai deck. The Viserai deck is strong, not insanely smashing, but good into the Prison deck, and the Prison deck beats up on the Bravo deck. And so it's sort of a, where do you want to position yourself in that triangle? And going into the weekend, with the results we'd seen from SCG, forget which one it was, the SCG con that has just passed, I don't remember where it was. We saw 5 Starvers in the top 8. I knew that having played the deck a bunch, it's quite easy to pick up. It's not an easy deck. I think any deck in Flesh and Blood is, unachievably complex to play perfectly, but like, you can take those pieces, pick them up, and I think play adequately with them, without losing too much value. And so I thought a lot of people will commit to that strategy, and I want to be somewhere where I'm strong into that. And sure enough, we saw 50% of the decks winning ProQuest this weekend were Starvo. So I was happy to be on Prism, because I think that matchup especially is very, very strong.
Yeah, well, that's what I've been trying to wrap my head around, is this Prism list, which is not necessarily always so straightforward, because it's it takes a lot of finesse, and I feel that's true against a lot of with a lot of these heroes. Maybe Starvo less so. Starvo it's fuse and swing. I'm not saying that there's no complexity to it. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying. But I feel like when it comes to learning a hero and the intricacies and just really, operating within those small little windows and margins where Prism likes to operate, operating at instant speed, dropping auras, not necessarily being too aggressive, playing the patience game and really chipping away. It's kind of like almost what those early iterations of like a control ninja used to be, with you kind of swinging in with the Kodachis, maybe just trickle in, but ultimately the goal is to just patiently build up this arsenal and come through, and you've settled on that. But what is your toughest match? Now, you mentioned this triangle, so you say that Viserai does have have an edge over the Prism list, but what in general? So besides Viserai, what are the weaknesses for this Prism list? What are the matchups that you are just desperately looking to avoid in that first round?
I don't think I'm devastated to see anything in a round. I think the Prism deck is quite linear and quite strong. It's just a linear and powerful strategy, which is where I tend to want to position myself in any format. Is I don't have any matchups where immediately I'm absolutely done as soon as they tell me what they're playing. But I would say probably the worst matchup is either Chain or actually it's something I played against in the first round of my first ProQuest this weekend, is an Earthbriar deck, which was a bit of a throwback to the start of the Tales of Aria format, where some of the guys from the UK Nationals brought an Earthbriar list, which plays a lot of sixes, but also has a good amount of go again, so they can threaten a lot of damage and still swing with a Rosetta on the end. Mm-hmm. I played into that strategy, and I underestimated how many sixes they had, and I ran out Heralds too aggressively in spots I didn't need to, and they punished me hard for it, because they have both the aggressive go again and the arcane damage to push through your spectral shields and to threaten your life total with the cheap Rosetta swing on the end. Combine that with all the sixes, and now both sides of your plan, both sides of being able to herald your opponent or your opponent become less efficient. And that matchup started to look a bit difficult. But I would say that with Prism, there's nothing you're terrified of. There are sometimes you just win the game. For example, if your opponent's playing an Oldhim, if you play against an Oldhim, you can be pretty assured, as long as nothing goes incredibly wrong, that you do now have a free win, which is probably the most lopsided, one-sided matchup in the game right now, I think, Prism into Oldhim, especially, well, if you have the Auras build, is. But like I said, there's nothing that's that awful, and that's where I want to be in a format. I don't want to be somewhere where my opponent tells me what they're playing and I just groan, and I might as well pack up my cards.
Yeah, you don't want to turn it into you don't want to walk into like a 90-10 scenario, right? Where it's just everything needs to go right and everything needs to go wrong for them. And that's basically part of the game, is just trying to assess where your strengths and weaknesses are with the decks that you're playing, but also what everyone else is playing. And that's, I think, is a key element. If ever I had like a show where I was just discussing like those tips of going from good to very good, like those are those kinds of little things that you can work on. Is you could be good at your own deck, but you need to be good at everyone else's deck too, to understand where those where your deck is positioned in that micro meta.
Important in a smaller scale as well, that you understand the pain points and the weaknesses of other decks, because then you can understand how to take advantage of them. Like, for example, this new Menace Starvo, it might look like all they do is go, haha, jazz hands, and hit you with the 13 damage crippling crush, and that happens every time. But what you don't see is that, if you can make them discard a card, or if you can make them block with a card, that suddenly their turns drop from, backbreakingly powerful to potentially very, very mediocre.
So, what would you say is the most overrated deck at this moment? I'm not saying that necessarily that the deck that you'd name is not a powerful deck, but there's certain people that say that certain things are unbeatable. When Starvo was just making its first charge to the top of the charts, there's a lot of people immediately calling for it to be revised, banned, whatever. And I always find that those kinds of, knee-jerk reactions, those emotional responses are never good, and things do eventually settle. But for yourself, what would you feel right now, for someone who's going into a ProQuest and might be overvaluing a particular deck or be too afraid of a particular deck? What would that deck be?
I I think that's an answer that changes probably almost day by day at this stage, especially in the early days of a format. We see massive changes at least in the early weeks of a format where, last weekend, if you ask someone what the best deck in the format, almost everyone would have told, well, depending on who you ask, but a lot of people would have told you Starvo. I would still have told you Prism because I've been smashing Starvos for a few weeks at that point, playing my Prism list, and seeing the results on this weekend, you might hear that answer. You might hear, oh, Prism's the deck to beat. But I would say that honestly, we sit in a place where people probably rate Starvo as the most powerful deck in the format, and they might be right. But that doesn't mean that there isn't weak matchups for it. I don't know how viable they are to bring it to a tournament if you want to have the absolute highest win rate, but Oldhim and Bravo are both good into Starvo. That's true, I think. The original Bravo, I think Prism has a great Starvo matchup. You can lose. Any deck can lose to Starvo because when it has all guns blazing, it does something that no one can interact with. If they go Oakenol with Dominate, Spinal, and they're fusing every turn, you just don't stand a chance, and that's okay. You could argue maybe that's not the most interactive and fun gameplay, but a very small percentage of the time that will happen and you will lose the game. But the rest of the time, they'll miss sometimes, and you need to be able to take advantage of them by having a strategy that can punish them in those times. So I would say the most overrated deck in the format, definitely Starvo right now. I think that we're going to see this weekend a bunch of Starvos getting beat by a bunch of Prisms, and a bunch of Prisms probably getting cleaned up by Viserais in the later rounds of tournaments.
Yeah, that's what worries me. That's what worries me. I put in so much work on learning Prism and getting just comfortable with and developing that muscle memory of drawing a hand and immediately understanding what the capabilities are of that particular hand, where it's difficult. It's kind of like getting the feel of something where you buy a new car or your first time on a motorcycle. It's just very careful and deliberate. You want to make sure that you're doing everything carefully and you take your time, but eventually, like I've had my '06 Corolla for God knows how long, and I'm able to navigate any underground parking lot because I know when I have like a millimeter of space on that before my bumper hits that column, I'm like, nah, I got this. This is an extension of my body. And that's where you have to get with some of these lists. But ultimately, when it comes to having a particular list, sometimes people have that remedy to, they have the antidote to what you're doing, and you can play it completely perfectly. But if there's a deck out there perhaps that people might not have on their radar, something that is competitive but people might not be respecting as much, what would that deck be in your opinion?
I think I've got a good one for this actually. I think that, and I actually was tempted to play it last weekend because I think it also has a really good Starvo matchup and a surprisingly strong Viserai matchup as well. I think it probably does struggle slightly into Prism. Sorry, it has a good Viserai matchup, but struggles slightly into Prism, and that would be Ice Lexi.
Oh boy, okay, yeah.
And I know that there's a lot of Lexi fans out there. A lot of people love Ranger, and I was never one of the Azalea fanboys. But I recently tried this Lexi deck, and although it can struggle into some of the older decks and some of the decks that can block pretty well, it provides enough disruption and just consistently threatening on hits that you can actually disrupt your opponents enough to just keep them on the back foot the entire game, And I'm sure a lot of us will remember the moment from top 8 of US Nationals with the Ranger player, the hero, who played the 3-0, drew the 3 cards, and still, despite drawing 3 extra cards, still bricked any arrows. And that can happen. That's part of the deck.
Yeah, that was Isaac Jessen. Yeah.
Yeah, Isaac Jessen missing hard, and everyone's hearts collectively breaking as the Briar Menace finished his run. But and that can be part of Ranger. There is some small inconsistencies, and that happens when you have a deck that needs multiple different pieces to put together. But some of the new cards in Everfest really do ramp up that deck and actually reduce some of the inconsistency issues. Things like Fatigue Shot. And Sleep Dart it's not a new card, but it's still a relevant card. It is really, really strong into both Starvo, because you can shut off his reveal effect, and also into Viserai, because Viserai's cards look a hell of a lot worse when Viserai doesn't do anything. Mordred Tide, not a very good card. Not a very good card when Viserai doesn't have any text. And Viserai really needs to be keeping those 5-card hands to be having a strong and consistent strategy. And so when you can consistently either threaten multiple Frostbites or Remorseless or Sleep Dart or even just Endless Arrow 3 times, you start to get in a position where your opponents will be blocking with a card or two every turn because you have these really threatening on-hits with Chilling Ice Vein or Blizzard Bolt or whatever it is. And your opponent will never have a 5-card hand, and their strategy goes from doing, maybe 16 to 20 damage every turn to sort of 8. They don't have that synergy, and that's what Runeblades, especially Viserai, really rely on, and Starvo without a 4-card hand is torn to pieces. So that would be my sneaky pick for the weekend is Lexi.
There's a lot of people who are going to be happy to hear that, and I don't think that it's not like this, hidden relic that has been dug up that a Lexi deck has potential, because it has essentially. I don't think that Isaac Jessen necessarily. Isaac Jessen was probably the first to really put a spotlight on the fact that the deck is capable, it's viable, and ever since that point, there was a natural decline to the Briar list over time, and even prior to the bans hitting it, there was a decline in terms of its not necessarily its potency. It still remained a strong deck, but how people addressed it and how people countered it was something that eventually bled into the community, and people figured out how to play against it. But Lexi was one of the first few that was able to deal with it fairly consistently. So that strategy of disruption, like you mentioned, of the on hits, the frostbites, the etc. You're constantly putting pressure on your opponent, and if you do have a good turn with a 3 of a kind, you can really pop off and close out games. But the fact remains is that it's still a niche hero, and we are seeing it pop into top 8s of ProQuests a lot more now, which is good to see that there's a little bit of a shift and adjustment regarding the Starvo Fest is essentially kind of winding down. Viserai's coming up there as probably even an equivalent to the power level of it. And Lexi's out there to kind of police a little bit, while Prism is just trying to hope that it can, continue to build its auras. But those top 2 dogs still remain. Starvo, Viserai, these 2 are still really top of the mountain, in my opinion. And I'm sure you can echo that. I know that you have a strong opinion, of course, about Prism, but as a Prism player, or as a player in general, how do you beat these 2 top dogs? How do you beat the Starvo list? How do you beat the Viserai?
So the Starvo deck, in general, you either need to race it, which can be very, very difficult, or you need to disrupt it. And I've said that there are ways to disrupt it with Lexi or Pummels or just ways to take the cards from his hands. But the best way that I've found to disrupt it is by playing Prism and presenting as many auras as possible every single turn for the entirety of the game. So I've taken all 27 Spectral auras and put them in my deck. I said this to someone the other day. I said, read Passing Mirage to me. And they started reading out the card, and I said, no, read the relevant text on the card. And they said, Spectra? And I was like, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. I said I might play an aura that literally read 0 cost, blue pitch, blocks 2, Spectra. Because it attacks for 1 every turn, at worst, as long as you can, get a yellow into your pitch. But, these auras that give you, a cumulative value over the course of a game, Starvo can't deal with them very well. If they have the go again from Starvo's ability, sure, they can clean 1 up every turn, but there'll be a lot of turns where you're doing 2, and then you'll find a tone turn, and suddenly it's 3, and then suddenly you're on 20, 18, 15 life, and now you have 4 auras in play, and they have to decide, okay, am I just going to swing for the fences? Am I going to try and kill him? Or am I going to keep trying to chip away at these auras? And that's a difficult decision to make, because if you make that decision wrong, if you make that decision too early, and I just slowly get in, coming in with a shimmer every turn, shimmer for 2, shimmer for 3, shimmer for 4, and then 5 turns have gone by and my shimmer of silver has dealt 20 damage, and you wonder where the game went. I found a ton of success into basically every Starvo pilot I can find, simply by doing that. And then against Viserai, you basically have to take the same strategy, because when you put 27 auras in your deck, you have basically one plan. It's not as successful because Viscera is much more efficient at dealing with dealing you damage and still cleaning up an aura, so they can keep you trimmed while also then being able to present. They have more reach, I guess would be the right term. They have more reach towards an end of a game where you can be at 15 life, and with the right set of cards, Viscera can say, okay, it's nice that you've got 15 life. I'll take it all, please.
Yeah, it seems to me like there's always this situation where your opponent has to eventually make a decision. There's a crossroads that they meet where they have to decide, do I continue to go face because there's 3 or 4 auras on the board and I've got you at sub 20, or do I start cleaning these up and try to mitigate the damage that you can come back? But it's a very pivotal part of any game, because as the Prism player, you don't necessarily get to make that decision, so you just dig into your game plan. So putting that onus on your opponent sort of liberates you from the pressure of figuring out what your game plan is, because your game plan typically remains the same. I mean, you might sneak in, an attack with a Herald here or there where you can, but ultimately that's not what it is. You might, eat dirt for a little while, eating damage while you're establishing the board, but unless your opponent is very dedicated to cleaning up your auras, eventually they just cross that Rubicon where there's no going back, and it's I'm going face or I'm cleaning up auras. But that presentation is I feel so liberated when I don't have to make that decision. I'm like, this is on you. And when they're sitting there thinking, I'm like, okay, do I attack Shimmers or do I swing face for 5 when I'm at like 18? And I'm like, that's on you. I don't have to make this decision, but just know that if you do swing Shimmers, your turn is over, and then I can cheat out a Genesis or cheat out a Parable or anything else. So I've always been really happy that that is on my opponent, where I could just worry about my own thing. So these are very key tips. And again, it's not like this is just some random skeleton key of information and advice where you can use this wisdom to go ahead and beat these decks reliably. These are still strong decks, and you still need to know your jam in order to face them. There's a reason why Starvo and Viscera just completely populate the top 8 as frequently as they do. So, practice. Just keep practicing, I suppose. I know that I am. I know that a lot of people are, but it's a tough pill to digest when you're either getting clubbed in the face with a dominated Okanold, or you're swallowing 11 rune chants and a 7 go again.
Yeah, I guess my main piece of advice for anyone playing Prism into those decks is to, like you say, really just learn to love getting clubbed in the face or eating 11 rune chants, because it's gonna happen. And I like to view the game with Prism in 2 very distinct parts of the game. There's the setup, and there's the hold on. You've got the setup where you're trying to get auras down, and they're trying to keep you in check, and they won't be able to. You will eventually put out more auras than they can manage, and they will have to try and kill you. Or if they keep trying to clean up your auras, you will probably kill them first, because you will simply outstrip them. They will deem it value to go for your face first, because you do put up too many auras. And then once you reach that point, now you need to survive. You just need to hold on and find your moments where you can use your auras to get a bunch of value. Even if it's just, Genesis, put one into my arsenal, or into my soul, create a spectral shield, create another spectral shield, attack for 4, or whatever it is, You need to find your times. But mostly, after you reach that stage where they stop attacking your auras, priority is just extending the game. But before that point, you're not looking to extend the game. You're looking to play as many auras as you can. And so it's really important to view these games in these 2 stages. Am I developing or am I surviving? And being fearless, I say, you have to be comfortable and happy. When your opponent says dominated crippling for 13, you can't block a dominated crippling for 13. You can't. So you have to just say, okay, maybe you block with 1 card, but you have to say, take it. In response to the Crippling Crush trigger, I will play out my aura. And now you've done the thing that you wanted to do for the turn, because that was your plan anyway. You can try and block and maybe play a defense reaction. I'm not so keen on the defense reactions as a lot of people are. I in general, plan to have as much of a proactive plan as I can. But realistically, you just have to let go and accept that sometimes you just get your face beaten. And as long as you keep developing, hopefully that time will come where they look at their hand and they say, oh, I have 3 ice cards. The best thing I can do this turn is swing with a hammer. And then you block with 1 card. You play your next aura. Now you're stable. And then suddenly you're putting a card into your soul and your card's pitched for 1 extra. And now you're playing a Miraging Metamorph. And wait, you've got a Piercing Mirage in hand. Now you're attacking for 9. And then suddenly the tide will turn. And you'll be stable.
Sounds good. As long as I've known you and we've spoken, you've always had a very unique opinion of what good cards are and bad cards are. I have always enjoyed discussions that you've had with people that we commonly know regarding what a good card is, and it is never what I think it is. I am always caught essentially off guard by when someone would say this is a good card. I'd be like, yeah, it seems like a good card, and usually the Matthew Foulkes reply is it's complete garbage. And I am always intrigued again, and I often I mean you're the UK Nats champion. You've won several pro quests. You're an established successful player in this game, so your opinion, it matters, and I want to know right now what you feel might be one of the most overrated cards, specifically not decks but cards out there, because I know that I have witnessed many conversations where it has been quite a passionate exchange regarding what a good card is.
If you get underrated, I would have your answer for you on the spot.
Okay, give us both. Let's go with both.
Okay. I'm going to take a second to think about the overrated, but I'll tell you about an underrated card, and that card is Belittle Minimalism. Well, specifically the belittle part, because that's the part that you need. But ever since I read those cards, and I didn't find them myself. I was put on them by a joint friend of ours, Nathan Zamora. That's admirable. He said, "Hey Matt, have you seen this belittle card?" And Nathan is a wise man, so I tend to give credence to anything Nathan said. I read it, and I said, oh my god, this card does 3 damage and generates 2 mana. Or, you get a blue, you pitch the 1, you're up 2 mana, you dealt 3 damage. That's like an even better Arknight Shard. That's a much better Arknight Shard. And ever since that moment that I realized how much, because I think everything in Flesh and Blood just comes down to numbers. Like, it's all about how much number you can get for your card. And if you don't think it comes down to numbers, it's because you haven't quite understood what the card effects in front of you mean numerically. Like you might say, well, auras aren't numbers, they don't have any attack. But you can work out, the parable. Every attack your opponent plays, gaining that 1 attack they would have had back. And then they have to attack it, so they lost an action point. And then you get every point from the damage it will have dealt. And so you just have to work out, how much damage value is this card actually getting me? And then you maybe could argue, well, also this kept my Merciful Retribution in play for an extra turn, which got me another damage from the Merciful Retribution trigger, and then it got a Haze Bending trigger. All these numbers will add up. And so, like, when you analyze cards, you have to try and understand the scope of what the numbers around the cards mean. But Belittle Minimalism is just simple, pure numerical value. You're getting paid to deal damage. You're getting mana back to deal damage, and that's my favorite go-to card. But in terms of an underrated card, and this is actually one that I've had some back and forth with a lot of people on, is actually Channel Lake Frigid. I remember a lot of people say, and I think Channel Lake Frigid is a powerful card, but I think people underestimate its impact because, like I said, everything is about numbers in Flesh and Blood and how much damage / value you can get out of your cards. And for Channel Lake Frigid, you're essentially paying, well, almost 2 cards because you're paying 2 mana to play it, and then the card it is to do 0 damage. And so when you pay the best part of 2 cards to do 0 damage, you better be getting a hell of a good effect out of that card. And Channel Lake Frigid, a good effect for sure, but I think that it's an effect that's highly overvalued in a lot of matchups because.
So just to clarify,
heavy price.
CLF is the overrated choice.
Yeah, CLF is the overrated
no,
card.
because you mentioned underrated. So I think so. Okay, so overrated. CLF is definitely overrated in your opinion.
CLF I have it, and I don't think it's a bad card. And it's still one of the strongest ice cards. And a lot of the decks need ice cards, and so you will play that. And into Rune Blades specifically, it can be impactful. But when your opponent plays a CLF, and out of the Brava deck, it's different because the upside or the downside of CLF is that when you play two cards to not do any damage, your opponent can now just opt to block with their cards instead, and they can get value that way from their cards. But with Starvo, it says, I know your cards cost one more, but I don't care because here's a massive dominated attack. So you don't get to block with your cards, and then you have to play them, but they cost more. And so, I think people don't view it as two cards for no damage enough.
Right.
They don't really understand that they are actually paying, maybe 6 life or however much damage they could have done with those cards to get that effect, and they have to be sure that they are getting that 2 cards of value back, or it wasn't a great play. So I don't think people necessarily look at it like that very often.
Do you feel perhaps that, like you mentioned, the fact that these decks that play it oftentimes just need ice cards, and in terms of what that ice card does, it's better than a lot of the alternatives? Do you think that this is a card that might be first off the chopping block for ice builds should new blue ice cards come out?
No, but I think that's more a testament of how weak some of the ice cards they play are. Not and I do think Channel Life is actually one of the stronger ice cards, but that's you wouldn't be playing a lot of those ice cards if you didn't require such a density of ice cards for Starvo's ability and Winter's Wail, or in the Oldhim deck, Oldhim Ice React.
Right.
I do think it's a strong card, but I think people often overrate it, is how I would say that card is viewed.
Sell your CLFs is what he's saying. They're
sell all to me for discount price.
While they're all high on the docket. All right. Well, the meta has, like you mentioned, we discussed the meta shifting from national season through to ProQuest season right now. Everfest is out and about. It's a real thing, ladies and gentlemen. And the next big one that's coming down the pipe is Indianapolis in about a month. I will be there. I can't wait to see a lot of people who will be there. I'm going to be participating in it. I love competing in this game. I don't anticipate making day 2, but hey, I'm putting in the work to.
I will get you there, bro. We'll get you ready.
I appreciate the encouragement and the optimism there. But how do you feel the meta will shift from now till Indianapolis? Now, keep in mind, obviously, there's still several weeks of ProQuests that are going to be coming down the pipe as well, and those are usually very big indicators moving into Indianapolis. Is it something that you think will continue to evolve? Obviously, there's going to be changes, but how drastic do you feel the landscape will look moving into Indianapolis, or is it too early to tell? And it's usually is it just a matter of a continuous progression? Can we prognosticate all the way down to Indianapolis, or is it something where we just got to see what the last ProQuest was and move from there?
Prognosticate, that's a strong word. Okay, I'm going to look deep into my mystic ball, Mystic Matt coming in here. And I'm going to tell you what every week will look like from now until Indianapolis. So how many weeks did you say it was?
I believe Indianapolis is like the 20th. So we're looking at, we'll say 4 weeks.
4 weeks. 4 weekends of tournaments. Okay, I will give you the meta for every weekend from now until then, in its exact form. Mm-hmm. Okay, so next weekend, we will see slightly more Starvos than we saw this weekend.
Okay, that's good, because I'm playing Prism in this upcoming weekend, exactly. And I'm hoping there's less Viscerize. Okay.
There will be more Prism. There will be more Prism.
Okay.
There will also be actually probably about the same number of Viscerize. Okay. What you'll see a reduction in is the number of probably people playing other things. And what you will see in the top cuts of tournaments, probably, is still some Starvos, but you will see less Starvo dominance. You will see a good amount of Prisms, and then you'll probably see a good amount of Chains and Viscerize winning events. And then the weekend after that, you'll probably see a bunch of Starvos beating Viscerize and Chains in tournaments. And then you'll see some Prisms comes back. So by the time that we get to Indianapolis, going through this cycle a couple of times, we will land perfectly, at the apex of the format, where Viserai will be the perfect deck to play at Indianapolis, because I do think, people have, you hear the immediate knee-jerk reaction calls for bans, and like you hear that, Starvo's doing something broken, and I do think that Starvo does have a favoured, and it's not massively favoured. I think if you take a defensive approach and block a lot as Viserai, you can actually have a pretty solid matchup into Starvo. You can sort of move for either a semi-OTK or a full OTK strategy, depending on how your game plays out. And I think you can get not quite to a 50%, but you can give yourself good shots. You can give yourself good chances into that matchup. And I think if the Starvo deck didn't exist, I would be playing Viserai right now. Because I've been testing with a lot of people, and we'd got to a point where we were playing this Viserai deck, and we were like, man, this Viserai deck does some crazy things, especially with the Vexing Quill Hand, which is a piece of equipment I think people are really underrating. You would look at this turn, and you'd sit there for 5 minutes, and you'd be like, I've seen an 18 damage turn, and then you'd look at it for another 5 minutes, and you go, 32 damage. There's a 32 damage line here. What the hell? What am I looking at? I don't have any rune chance to start the turn. How am I doing 32 damage? But then this deck would do this game after game, and if Starvo wasn't around, I think Viserai would be an absolute menace. And so because the format has been so dominated to begin with by Starvo, I think people will hold a lot of memory, and people will sort of commit to a deck. And that deck for a lot of people will be Starvo, because it's pretty consistent, it's a strong deck. But once the Viserai pilots who are very comfortable, start to develop that skill and develop the ability to play the deck, and it is a very hard deck to play, because like I said, you can sit there for 5 minutes and still not see the best line. We'll see the Viserai players, get good enough into Starvo so that they can clean up the rest of the tournament. Like, I think if Starvo didn't exist, we would be in a place where everybody is complaining about Viserai.
I think you're right. There needs to be kind of like this police that goes around and might have to, punish the Viserais. Otherwise, I kind of agree with you, and it does do some crazy things, like the way that it manufactures these massive turns of multiple instances of damage across various different styles. You have your arcane, you have your physical, there's a weapon that comes through. It's not just the single rune chance. You've got the double arcane, the arcane 2 off of the Rosetta Thorn. It's a really gross, it's disgusting sometimes to just watch this. I played yesterday. Yeah. I was practicing against Viserai with a buddy of mine, and you think you're in a good spot, and then they basically say, all right, I got what I need. I've got a pile of rune chance. I'm going to crack my Bloodsheath Skeleton and just go nuts. I'm going to have a huge Sonata. I'm going to come at you, and then your plans are basically ruined. And like you mentioned earlier, when it comes down to the strategy versus Prism, oftentimes they're just like, yeah, I'll get at your Genesis, perhaps, maybe, but ultimately, I think I can handle the rest of this. I'll be plowing through your spectral shields. You're going to be struggling to have auras on the board, and eventually there's this massive, the tipping point where you're hit with a huge turn, like you mentioned. And the more you look at it, the creativity of how these cards kind of interact, it gets nasty. You see that first Mordred Tide, you see the popping of the Quill Hand, you see all the cards coming through Sonata, etc., and you know that there's this reckoning that's happening, and it's nasty, but Starvo's out there just pounding on them whenever possible.
Yeah, so thank God, honestly.
Yeah, well, that's it. So all the people that are crying for bans, just wait, because imagine if Starvo got changed, then Viserai comes in, then you have to change Viserai, and suddenly Prism starts, popping up.
People might end up looking at that nursery rhyme. The I swallowed a spider to catch the fly.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
I guess she'll die. I've always had a problem with that nursery rhyme. How bad was medicine back there? If you swallow a fly, you're gonna die. Like, God bless where we live in the time.
God bless the spider.
Yeah, medical science has saved us.
I think Starvo is the spider, and then what comes next, I don't know. But yeah, that's how it feels. Like, if you ban the one thing, the next thing is still coming. You still have the problem. So and I don't think anything needs a ban. I really don't. I think it's fine that there's a new hero that's good, if the new hero wasn't good, we wouldn't be playing new cards, and that's, people will always end up, complaining about something new. I remember I saw people complaining about Briar mirrors towards the end of UK Nationals, and I was the first person to ever play the deck on a stream, and people were already sick of it less than basically 24 hours later. So, I'm happy with the format right now. I'm really excited to be playing, actually 6 more ProQuest this season. I'm currently planning to play every available event, and that'll be 8.
And you've already got one under your belt. You've top 8'd another. Yes. And are you committed to Prism the whole way through, or are you you've got one under your belt, so it's just kind of everything's extra gravy now, right?
No, I'm not. I'm obviously very, very happy to have won one. I'm glad, because I think I can put a lot of pressure on myself to perform, and it is a relief to not have to win. I don't have to win one, but not need to win one to qualify for the Pro Tour, to not have to use my PTI. It does take some of the pressure off going into these events, but I still want to do well, and I still want to come to the right conclusion for what the best deck is for the tournament. I consider a fun part of the puzzle being able to try and understand the landscape of what tournament I'm going into, and actually having the correct deck. It's not about necessarily playing, what deck I enjoy the most, or, what fits my style. I'm happy to adjust my style to what I think will give me the highest win rate, and that's a fun part of the game for me. So I'm not locked into Prism. I think it's great, and I think very likely I will play Prism this weekend, because I think there will still be a lot of Starvo. But if you told me I had to play Viserai this weekend, I'd also be pretty happy with that. I don't think I'd play Starvo going into this weekend, because I think you'd be playing so many mirrors, which I'm told. I've played some mirrors, but from people who are more experienced than me, I'm told the mirrors can be, it's 2 ships sailing in the night a little bit, and that can be less than enthusing, and then you have to play into a ton of Prism. And I've been playing Prism for a good month now, and I've had so many people come to me with their Starvo builds, being like, no, trust me, I've made some changes. I think the Prism matchup's really good right now. And then you go, sure, Merciful Retribution, Haze Bending, and they go, oh, I think I might have made a mistake. So I don't think I'm locked. I think that very well, maybe I play Prism this weekend, and then I find myself playing Viserai the weekend after that. I could see that being the case. And maybe Prism is already not the perfect choice. Because saying not the right choice when you pick a tier 1 deck is not accurate, Like, if you're picking a good deck and you know how to play with it, like if you're picking Starvo, Viserai, Prism, and I don't think I have done it justice, to be fair, in this podcast so far, but Chain, we see one of the best players in the world, Tarek, happy to play Chain, and that says something. When someone as good as him is playing a deck, you need to sit up and listen, and I probably haven't given it enough justice. That deck is a real check, because that deck is relentlessly quick and consistent, and someone that knows how to play the deck well is terrifying. We saw one pilot win 2 ProQuests this weekend in the UK with Chain. Slightly different list than Tarek's, but that's a deck that, I could very well see myself playing if we do end up in a place where, it's a bunch of Starvos and Prisms, and no one's actually respecting aggro. No one has those defense reactions or a real plan to deal with Chain. Then I could totally see myself there.
To quote Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's probably, we saw Tarek win his ProQuest this weekend doing exactly that. So I don't think I'm locked into Prism. But if you told me I had to play Prism, I'd also be very happy. The deck is very linearly powerful in a way that there's not going to be a meta where it's bad. It's always going to be one of the best few choices. I just like to try and pinpoint and have the perfect deck. Even if I'm not the most experienced with it, I'm happy to play a deck that I have less reps on if I think it's better positioned for the tournament. Simply because I trust myself to either be able to get those reps between the time I make the decision, or I trust myself to play the deck without as many reps. And I'll learn on the job as it will.
All right, last question for you here, Matt, is you've won one. It's a two-parter. The first one is what was the gold foil that you won? And if you do win another Pro Quest, what's the gold foil that you want?
So I won a Dawnblade, which I was really happy with. I think that's, at least in terms of like numerical value, like financial value, probably one of the more impressive ones. And then what ones do I want? Probably Snapdragon Scalers. I think that's also one of the most valuable ones, but that's not really why I want it. I just think that's an awesome card. Like, I think it's just like one of the most ubiquitously powerful cards. And I haven't got a chance to play with any of my gold foils yet. So I have a Storm Striders from UK Nationals and a Dawnblade now. So, if I was to win one, and I don't think that necessarily I'm favoured to win another one. I've already got lucky to win one Pro Quest, Any more would be, certainly very fortunate. Winning them is hard. And one thing I've noticed in events recently in the UK, at least, that the level is much higher now than it was even a few months back at Nationals. People have really stepped up their games, and I think we're really seeing like the competitive scene in Flesh and Blood probably everywhere, I assume, because with more and more tournaments announced and the Pro Tour and the SCGs, like, people are realizing that this game is real. They're saying,
yeah,
hold on, there's a Pro Tour, there's SCGs, there's coverage. Like, that's why I play the games. So
I feel like there's this situation right now where there's that scene in a Western where you have there's like that sheriff who's basically run that small town, who's like the law, and all of a sudden like this crew of bandits comes in on their horses, and the sheriff's like, I run this spot, and then they just immediately eviscerate him, and they're like, no, we're new in town, by the way. So I think that there's, I wouldn't say, but like perhaps some of the best players who have run the table in the past there's this influx of brand new fish to the pond, friends. So like it's gonna get ugly, and it's gonna be this maelstrom of just haymakers back and forth, because like you mentioned, there's an established pro tour. There's money to be won. There's a sustainable career to be had if you're good enough, and I think that people are beginning to, and I don't say beginning to, but are finally realizing that this is not a flash in the pan game. I think that this game has some longevity to it, but at the same time, I believe that people are also understanding that the complexity of this game and every single particular hero is so it's deep, it's layered, and the best players who can understand all of those layers and dig and find new ones are the ones who are going to be successful. And perhaps a lot of the old guard now have to realize that if they want to be the best, it's no longer a matter of finding that second or third or fourth gear, because everyone is now behind you already in fifth. So you need to make sure that you're finding that extra gas when necessary.
Yeah, and I have had like a bunch of my play. I'm a Magic player, as I'm sure you're aware. Or at least I used to be. I haven't really been playing the game competitively, basically since I started playing Flesh and Blood. But now I've had a good amount of my friends start to be like, "Hey, any chance you could teach me to play Flesh and Blood?" And I'm always happy to. I'm so excited to bring other people into the game because it's so fun, and playing card tournaments is always the funnest thing I could do with a weekend, basically, And
you've won several, and some of the top so far. I mean, Nationals essentially right now is the pinnacle in terms of what success looks like in terms of this game. Worlds will be coming, Pro Tour will be coming, but at the moment right now, you've basically won at every level. You've won the Road to Nationals, you've won Nationals, you've won Pro Tour.
I think I am, and I this is just a completely shameless brag, the world's only undefeated ranked player.
The stats are there, baby. Who am I to argue?
Exactly. It's only one event. It's one event, but I will hold it,
I don't know. I think my claim to fame is I top 8'd a Pro Quest, like back at Canadian Nationals. it's a topic.
So far, we're gonna get you there, Flake. We're gonna get you there.
I think I could do it. I mean, listen, at a certain rate, it's like this is what I do for a living, mind you. Like the broadcast element is what I dig my heels into. This is where I cut my teeth. But ultimately, that is on the backbone of being a card player. I played cards for 23 years since I was 24 years since I was 12 years old. So I'm 36 now. I've been playing cards. This has been my whole life, and I have this well of wisdom. It's just a matter of trying to translate it and getting reps in. And that's, if anything, like put it this way, I picked up other card games like when I picked up Magic, it didn't take me too long to hit Mythic rank on MTGA. When I picked up Hearthstone, it didn't take me long to get to Legend, Gwent, ProQuest, all those other games, because eventually you just kind of understand that there's a lot of cross-pollination of strategy from one to the other. You can take what you learn in one and translate it. But when it comes to this game, I mean, I don't know if it's just the fact that I'm playing against very, very good players, but man, it is a grind. There is no easy out, I find, when I'm playing. I mean, there have been very few instances where I can go into a game and say, man, like from start to finish, I was just in the driver's seat. I mean, it's occurred, absolutely. Some of my favorite moments were decisively beating some really loudmouth, salty, jerk-off people, and I'm not going to name names, but they're out there. But those are the victories I relish the most. But man, oh man, like when I lose a game, I don't necessarily feel bad if I learned something from that experience. And Lord knows, I mean, one of my most cherished moments in this game was when I lost to the ProQuest I attended at Gamers Lair in Barrie, Ontario, was won by a gentleman by the name of Raymond Chow. And Raymond was someone who beat me in an RTN. I could have gone 5-1 at that RTN, but I went 4-2 because I didn't know what Bolton Sabres OTK was. And the beautiful part about it was that like, I just did not know what the hell was going on. But ultimately, the beautiful part about that was he sat down with me after and went through his entire list. We sat there and we talked, and he went through each card and taught me the strategy of it, what the important parts are, how to beat it. And I haven't lost to that deck since, and I owe it to him. But for every, I'm glad to say that for every 9 Raymonds there's usually that one guy who I beat at a tournament who was salty as F, and it was like I went home just smiling. I'm like, I don't care about the money I won. I care about beating this guy. Felt good.
Sometimes you can just take pleasure in beating people, and that's actually one fun part of winning UK Nationals is that, like, I can tell now that when I play people, and I don't mean this in an arrogant way, they want to beat me, like I have a target on my back, because when you win a national championship, you're the guy everyone wants to beat, and that's great, because when people play me, I know they have their A game, and I know they care, and I care just as much, whether it's an Armory, or it's ProQuest, or it's the Pro Tour. When I play, I want to win. And I just love having those intense, focused, close games where both people are there to game and both people come to win. So
it's the beauty of the game, my friend. And I do appreciate you being on the show. And great insight, Matthew. Thank you so much for doing it. And best of luck, again, moving forward in terms of not just the ProQuest, but also trying to teach me how to win with Prism. Because that, frankly, that is your biggest challenge, ultimately.
They say it's not how accurate you are. It's how many bullets you've got in the chamber, And like you said, you've got a few more bullets left. So hopefully we can get one of them in the target,
Yeah, well, I'm saving one to just end it painlessly if this is not going to go well. So, friends, thank you very much for listening to In Response, an Instant Speed podcast kind of show. We're joined again by Matthew Foulkes, UK National winner, as well as ProQuest finalist and ProQuest winner himself, still more down the line. So, friends, thank you so much. Don't forget, you're not losing if you're learning. Just keep playing the game. You might win. We'll catch you next time on the Instant Speed podcast.